So, welcome everybody to another edition of the week that was. And just to break it down, this is a Twitter first conversation looking back at the week. We can have a conversation. You can participate in the comments. If I have an opportunity, I will specifically address your particular comments. So, four topics. That we're going to look at today. Number one, we're going to start off with Song of the Year, Ukozi FM, and some of the other debates that unfolded from that. Number two, we're going to look at vaccine skepticism. Number three, we're going to look at alcohol bans. And number four, we're going to look at the African Continental Free Trade Area and what this means for you. So, going to the first one, the Song of the Year. So I actually think that two things are critical here. Number one is that we actually need a unified platform to determine what's the Song of the Year. Because if we have multiple platforms declaring their particular Song of the Year, it takes away from the whole thing. Because if, five stations say, Makadzi's song is the Song of the Year, and Ukozi FM says it's whoever they said it was, that takes away from trying to really crown a winner for who actually had the best project in terms of musically that was received well by the people. So that's number one. Number two, I think there needs to be a diversification of the voting system. I think just voting via SMS is not necessarily always the best way to determine who has won the most popular song of the year, although it's really song of November and December, not really the year, because what's normally the most current and relevant song isn't necessarily the best song produced that particular year. But if it's going to be by popular vote, I do think one, we need a consolidated platform, and number two, we need to expand the voting regime. I also think that there's got to be a way of adding streams to the conversation, because if you have this song that is, well streamed on YouTube, well played on Spotify, Apple Music, right? Is it enough for someone to say, well, this other song is popular, in particular communities that listen to the show at this particular time or that listen to the radio at this particular time? So I think for me, the best way to get a clear winner, because there is money that some of these stations award to the winner, I think the best way to do it was to combine all of the different radio stations and have one show, to use a multiplicity of votes, and also to consider streams. Having said all of that, I want to say that there's almost a creeping attitude that's happening in this conversation where it's now becoming either regionalist or it's actually becoming tribalist or genre specific. I really think that the Song of the Year ought to be an award that goes to the most popular song, regardless of genre, regardless of tribe. So if Makadzi has the Song of the Year, let that be the Song of the Year. If Big Zulu has the Song of the Year, let that be the Song of the Year. I think that in defending certain genres over others, we create a potential where we can ruin the fun of the whole thing and mess it up. Having said that, and before I move on, the real Song of the Year, in my estimation, is Big Zulu, Imali, Eni. That's the Song of the Year. So let's do it justice a little bit. This is the song that should have won here. 5.4 million views on YouTube in 1 month. That's the Song of the Year. If you have a different song, if you think a different song should have won, let me know which one you chose in the comment section. But let's acknowledge that this song, Big Zulu, he did the things to the pots. This is the winning song right here. Eni. That's the Song of the Year right there. That's the song. Having said that, I must say the message of this song is actually a message that no one should actually follow through. You need to save your money. You need to spend within your means, and don't have an attitude that just says spend your money, eat meat, and you're going to get some more money later on. I think the message behind Imali Nengi is a problematic consumerist capitalist message. But let me stop there. Somebody asked what the song is about. Basically, the chorus is about, I want to have money, lots of it. I want to be able to eat lots of meat and not eat these traditional boring meals. And let's spend all our money, we're going to get some more. And I think the last part, the let's spend our money, we're going to get some more philosophy, is the one that I think is actually not a good message. Do not take your financial advice from rappers. In fact, they want you to do that because where you're spending your money is where they make their money, right? So you better be careful when rappers tell you to spend all your money, because what they're actually saying is transfer the wealth from your pocket to their pocket. So be careful. Rappers always speak about balling and all of that, and they want you to channel the money to them. So, having said that, let's have a more serious discussion, and that discussion concerns vaccine skepticism. So, vaccine skepticism fundamentally is the reluctance, the recalcitrance, or the resistance to taking the COVID vaccine. I'm specifically talking about the COVID vaccine. I'm not talking about anti-vax, because anti-vax is a movement that seeks to deny the effectiveness of vaccines. It seeks to not take any vaccines. But I think different from vaccine denialism is vaccine skepticism, which is the recalcitrance, the resistance, and the skepticism which exists specifically to the COVID 19 vaccine. And I want to make a submission here, as I think that this particular problem is being dealt with in the wrong way. I don't think that you deal with the issue in the way that people have been dealing with. And I'll explain just now. I just need to get my stopwatch running because I want us to spend 30 minutes, no less, on this on the whole thing. So right now, what is happening is when people express skepticism of the vaccine, we're having a lot of people dismiss them. We're having a lot of people label them. We're having a lot of people bully the people who are skeptical about the vaccine. But I don't think that actually reduces the skepticism. And I think that it actually could take quality conversation off the radar for those people, because if they're expressing their skepticism, they do have an openness to some level of discussion. So I think that number one, we need to understand what are the sources of the vaccine distrust. So number one is medical malfeasance. Medical malfeasance is a more extreme version of medical malpractice. It's criminal medical activity. And unfortunately, there have been instances of medical malfeasance around the world, but in Africa and in Black communities. So when people come and pretend, that they are practicing ethical medicine, but are actually practicing medicine that is harmful towards the recipient communities, and it reaches a criminal level, that is medical malfeasance. You can actually go to jail for that. Then there's also medical racism. Medical racism is the use of medicine or medical research in ways that are discriminatory, in ways that seek to undercut particular communities on the basis of their race. So malfeasance may not have a racial motive, but medical racism does have a racial motive. So it's malfeasance with a racist motive. Now, there are some very famous examples of medical malfeasance or racism, depending on the example. So let me give you some of the highlights. We all know that Dr. Death in South Africa during apartheid was using medical practices, using science to create concoctions that would kill the Black community, that would reduce fertility in the Black community. And this was an instance of medical racism in South Africa. We know that there were experiments in America where American Black men were being infected with syphilis, and they were being actually told that they were being treated for syphilis, but that was not actually the case. We also know that sanitary pads that have been delivered in some African countries have been of an inferior standard. So, for example, the sanitary pads that were being delivered by multinational companies in Kenya were not of the same level of quality as the ones that were being delivered in the United Kingdom, the ones that were being delivered in America, or even in South Africa. So, what does that all do? If you've been a victim or are aware of these kind of practices, you are going to be skeptical about the new treatment that is being promoted or advocated for in your environment. Another thing that is a source of skepticism, and it's a natural source of skepticism, I would submit to you, is the accelerated process of this whole thing. Everything is moving very fast. People heard about COVID 19 early last year. Many people were not aware of COVID 19 in December of 2019. Most people became aware of it in January of 2020. And a lot of stuff has happened between January of 2020 and January of 2021. So, whenever something moves at that kind of speed, whenever there's a lot of politics behind it, a lot of shouting, a lot of noise around it, it's going to create skepticism. And the reality is, if we're being honest, I think it may even be more than half of the people in Africa are unwilling to take the vaccine as things stand. Some of them are denialists of COVID in and of itself. Others are skeptical of the vaccine as things stand. The other contributor of skepticism are the conspiracy theories, the ones about billionaires, the ones about all of the various people who have agendas to reduce global population through the use of vaccines. So the conspiracy theories really, they fall into the bracket which is the COVAX, what is it, the anti-vax crowd. The anti-vax crowd is the one that really dabbles in the conspiracy theories. And I want to make a separation between people who are vaccine skeptical but accept the science on vaccines and those who are vaccine deniers altogether. So I want to make the submission, having gone through that process, is that being dismissive, one, is counterproductive, but two, the best way to deal with COVID skepticism is not to attack those who are being skeptical, but really to work on creating maximum and full transparency on the vaccine procurement process, the vaccine preparation process, and also the checks and balances that exist in quality control of the vaccine. Because if you simply say to an African, no, you're just going to get the same quality of vaccine as Americans, that's not the requisite level of information. You're just asserting, you're being dismissive. But I think if we actually create the systems in place that can allow people to check the different vaccines, to check that everything has been followed, every protocol has been followed for Africa, that is likely to increase the level of trust, is likely to increase the level of vaccine adoption. But if we don't do that, if we just simply act as if the people who are vaccine skeptical are crazy, then I think we're going to see challenges with the adoption of the vaccine moving forward. I mean, already there's a viral video from a TV celebrity who was also speaking about COVID and more on the, conspiracy side of the equation. But I really think that as we have conversations about the vaccine, let's have the right quality of conversations, especially in respect to the people who have skepticism. I also think that we need to be very aware of the phenomenon of vaccine nationalism, because America has produced two vaccines, Moderna and another vaccine, and then we've seen the United Kingdom produce the AstraZeneca one with Oxford. Then we've also seen Russia and China produce different vaccines. So right now, everyone is trying to push for their vaccine to be the vaccine. So when the UK announced that they were approving their vaccine, we saw Fauci actually make some comments which many in the world viewed as political when he said that the United Kingdom was rushing. But right now, we all know that the Oxford vaccine is one of the vaccines which is actually preferable because it doesn't have to be stored at these super low temperatures and it's actually cheaper per unit cost. So having said all of that, I think as we have conversations about the vaccine and the vaccine procurement and the vaccine plans, we also need to have conversations about the specifications, the advantages and disadvantages of different vaccines, and which vaccines should be the vaccines of first choice or first instance for Africa. And we also really need to look at all of the options that are on the table objectively. So as Africans, we don't necessarily have to choose between America and or Britain in terms of vaccine suppliers. If the Russia vaccine is cheaper and is as effective as per scientific review, not as per political preference, as per scientific review, let's get the Russia one. If the China vaccine is effective, quality, cheaper, then let's get that one because the reality is we're trying to make sure that we can rejoin the global community without there being a risk from Africa of COVID-19 spread. It's so unfortunate that Africa has to go through this whole process because we are victims. Africans didn't travel to Italy. Africans didn't travel to China or the UK, or most Africans really. Most Africans haven't even left Africa. The vaccine, the pandemic or the virus was brought here by international travelers, elites. Most of them were not, African by origin, and now Africa has to suffer these massive impacts, and we're going to have to pay for the vaccine. They're not going to give it to us for free. So it's unfortunate that Africa is going through all of this. Having said that, though, I do think that there's a way that Africa can deal with the issue of vaccine hoarding. Because what we've seen is that countries like Canada and Australia have bought more, or they've reserved and paid for more doses than they have citizens. So Australia, I think they've got 5 or 6 times more doses of the vaccine ordered than they have citizens. And this is where I think social media can be a powerful platform, because we can call them out for that kind of selfish, self interested behavior. Because how on earth is it ethical for you to hold on to 10 times the doses that you need, while these doses could go to other parts of the world and save their economies and potentially save their lives? This is where I think we can be quite vocal as Africa in a unified front to make sure that the vaccine hoarding is called out, and countries that have hoarded that vaccine do pass on the vaccines that they buy. Canada has said that they will do that anyway, but I think that pressure needs to be applied, right? I think that they were very selfish. And I think it's quite interesting because some of the countries that have hoarded the vaccine claim to be progressive. They claim to be passionate about social justice. So if you are passionate about social justice and you understand the institutional exclusion and how Africa got to be marginalized and systemically disadvantaged, why on earth would you hoard a vaccine? So that applies to countries like Canada, that applies to countries like Australia, and others as well, which have done the same thing in Europe. So they will have to be challenged. We'll have to challenge them around vaccine hoarding. So that's really where I want to leave the vaccine conversation. I think let's be careful how we deal with the skeptics. Let's make sure that we consider all of our options in terms of the vaccines that are available as per the science, and also let's call out those who are vaccine hoarding. I want to move now to the other topic, which was a big topic in the discourse over the last few days: the issue of alcohol bans, the banning of booze, sale, transportation, consumption, whatever the case may is, public consumption, that is. So we all saw the images coming from Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital in Johannesburg, which is the largest, I think, hospital in Africa. And what they were saying there was, oh, for the first time ever, on the 1st of January, on New Year's Day, there were no, trauma unit cases in the hospital. And it was something that was being celebrated, and politicians jumped onto it immediately to say, aha, you see, no trauma cases. This is why the alcohol ban must be extended. And this is why we need an alcohol free South Africa, and so on and so on and so forth. So the trauma unit cases are generally caused by accidents from drunk driving or reckless driving. Sometimes the drunk driving goes with the reckless driving, sometimes it doesn't. The trauma cases also come from fights that occur in social drinking environments, whether it's pubs, whether it's shebeens, whether it's taverns, whether it's clubs. Fights break out, people have egos, people fight over partners, women, men, they, them. There's a lot of contestation, and sometimes those contestations end up in physical confrontations. So the argument, though, I think needs to be dissected a little bit further, because correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation. What does that mean? It means that if you observe one phenomena going along with another phenomena, you may conclude that the one phenomena is causing the other phenomena, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is the case, especially if there are other multiple causes happening concurrently. So let's examine what happened. So the president made an announcement and introduced some restrictions. One of those restrictions was the sale, transportation, and public consumption of alcohol is prohibited. Boom. Sale, transportation, public consumption of alcohol prohibited, right? That's one of the things that was announced. Number two, a curfew was announced, right? From 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And number three, there was also an increased police visibility in social spaces where drinking used to happen. So the police were all over the place, trying to make sure people don't light fireworks, if they don't drink alcohol, and that they stay in their homes. And, the minister said you're going to be asleep at 9 p.m. and you're not going to do anything. So already there's three different things that you're looking at there. One, police visibility. Two, the alcohol restriction. And three, the curfew. So when the argument is made that just banning the alcohol is what led to the empty trauma wards, I think that analysis is not necessarily holistic, and it's simplistic, and it's reductionist in a way that doesn't serve a holistic understanding of what actually happened. So I want to submit to you my understanding of the case. Alcohol was still consumed on New Year's Eve and on New Year's Day. That much is a given. We know that people have alcohol, they stocked up alcohol, and they accessed alcohol on alternative markets. That much is true. Of course, the amounts of alcohol that were accessed were reduced, but there was still a lot of alcohol that was accessed by people across the board. Now, the question then is the social element. The social element is an element that is critical because even though people had alcohol, they could no longer drink it in the environments wherein confrontations happen. Those environments being clubs, pubs, bars, taverns, shebeens, and even just emakoneni. So if now you've closed out all of the social drinking, right? I think a critical question has to be asked, is it not the social drinking and the events around the social drinking which really are the drivers of the trauma cases or the trauma unit cases on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? Because even if alcohol is sold Monday to Thursday, what we've seen is that the trauma units are not full Monday to Thursday. What normally happens is that they're full on the weekend. So we need to examine and think critically about the weekend activity. So some people have pointed out, and I agree with them, that even the fact that there were increased police presences in areas where public drinking was historically prevalent, also shows that people are less likely to fight in those kind of instances. So what I'm saying in saying all of this is that I don't think that alcohol in and of itself is the reason why you have all of those trauma cases. I think that reducing the social drinking, policing social drinking, and also the curfew in and of itself, because there's less people driving recklessly at midnight. All of those things are the reasons why we didn't have the trauma cases being the way that they were. I also want to say that in having the discussion around alcohol, we sometimes ignore the social contract around alcohol as it exists right now, the legislative contracts, as well as just the common understanding we have. Everyone knows that alcohol is a harmful substance, right? It's harmful personally to you, the liver, other organs. It's harmful when you become, an alcoholic and dependent on it, because that leads to very bad social behavior. And those social harms actually pose risks to other people. So people who become abusive under the influence harm others. People who drive recklessly under the influence harm others. But we still allow drinking. We still allow it, even though we are appreciative of the reasons why it is harmful. Right? We allow it, number one, because we respect people's freedom of choice and agency. Because not everyone who drinks alcohol is going to drink it in a manner that leads to the social harms that have been identified. And then number two, um, not everyone who um, drinks alcohol, not only are we talking about the issue of their behavior, but also we're talking about their level of information when they consume alcohol. Not everyone is going to consume it in a way that leads to the same outcomes. So we recognize people's right to the freedom of choice. But what do we do to balance out the risks that exist from alcohol consumption and the individual choice? What we do is we use the syntax as a bridge, because what the syntax does is it charges an additional tax for the consumption of the harmful substance, and the proceeds of that are supposed to go towards the medical costs of the consumption of that substance. Why? Because it's unfair for civilians who are not participating in the consumption of the drug to pay for the costs of the consumption of the drug, right? So if you don't drink alcohol, it would be unfair for you as a tax-paying citizen to pay for people's liver treatment, to pay for all of the other chronic conditions which could arise. So the transaction is you take the money from the sin tax and then you use it towards the medical costs of the machines, the doctors, etc., etc. That's the social contract. I do think, however, that some of the proceeds from sin taxes are not necessarily going towards the programs that they're meant to. Just to close off the conversation around alcohol bans, I think that there needs to be an examination of the root causes of self medication. Because what people are doing when they drink alcohol is that they're self medicating. They're self medicating because they have personal trauma. They're self medicating because they live in very rough social environments and alcohol provides them a way of escape. They're self medicating to numb the pain of their experiences. And if we don't address the root causes of the self medication, what you can do, even if you have an alcohol ban, even if you make alcohol expensive, as some people have been suggesting, is that they will go to cheaper alternatives which still exist. So some people then could go to this alostro inducing thing. Kind of king dieting. What's the thing called again? The thing that gives everyone alostro. So they could go to those kind of very cheap and dangerous substances, which are way more addictive than alcohol. So just because you have banned something or made something more expensive doesn't necessarily mean that self medication will stop in the societies and communities where self medication is happening. What is actually more required is an honest conversation about what are the drivers of the self medication. Do people need therapy? Let us create programs that provide that kind of therapy so that they don't feel like they need to use drugs to self-medicate. If the drivers are poverty and frustration from poverty, let us create employment and dignity opportunities in those communities where people don't feel like they have dignity, where they don't feel like they have the employment, so that we don't have the kind of alcohol consumption or the kind of self-medication behaviors which are problematic. If the other driver is just that the social context or the social environments where drinking happens are not safe, then there may be a need to make sure that those environments are safe in terms of so that people don't fight, so that you don't have the kind of assaults, etc., etc. So you need to have a holistic conversation around substance abuse. And I think that the conversation that we have been having has been reductionist, simplistic, and sometimes pushing people's moral thoughts on alcohol consumption as opposed to really trying to create the best policy to manage alcohol consumption. I must say this though, the Christian conservatives can sometimes be the most difficult people in the alcohol conversation because they want to impose their morality on the rest of society. And even though I'm a Christian, I think that kind of an approach is not a healthy approach because you're not supposed to impose your personal moral standards on others. What you're really trying to make sure is that society is as free for everybody, others and yourself as a Christian. So when you try to make others buy into your moral standard, whether it's the length of a skirt or whether or not they should drink, I think that you then become a counterproductive member of that society and you use your religion for the wrong purposes. I also want to say there's no theological basis for Christians to be opposed to alcohol. Because, first and foremost, God is the one that taught, is it Noah, how to make alcohol, right? This is God inspired. That's number one. Number two, the first miracle, the very first miracle, is that, turning the water into wine, because Jesus went to a party and he didn't want the party to stop. So he assisted the people to keep the party going. One, that tells me that God appreciates a good time, and two, that God will bless you and help you have a good time. So when Christians are opposed to alcohol, what's your theological basis for this? It wasn't grape juice. It was alcohol that gets people drunk. And even if you look at the Judaic communities now, if you look at Jews around the world, they drink wine, and it's not grape juice that they're drinking. And some of their winemaking traditions come from back in the days. There's a wine that's called Moscato wine. It's like a Jewish wine, and you can't tell me that the Jewish people they have gone off track in terms of the wine that they're making. So I think it's very important that the moralizing on alcohol consumption must not necessarily be used in the pursuit of policy making, because your moral standard is not necessarily the correct one, and you should not always try to impose a non-subjective moral standard. Some moral standards are universal. Killing people is objectively wrong, regardless of whatever moral position you're coming from, except, of course, in instances of self defense or justified war. But killing people universally is wrong. But whether or not it's correct to consume, reality altering substances, I don't think that there's an objective standard on that. It's a morally subjective topic, and your morally subjective conclusions should not be imposed on others. Same as the length of a skirt, same as use of profanity. You may not like that use of profanity, but that doesn't mean that you can legislate against the use of profanity. And those who oppose alcohol consumption on the basis of their religious moral standards ought not to bring those into the public fora. As much as we respect your religious standards, I think you ought to be careful around imposing them on others. So that deals with the issue of alcohol bans. Let's go to the last issue, which is that of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So if you are new or you don't follow me much, I do have an Africa only podcast. It's called Josie to Lagos. It's amazing. I guarantee you it's amazing. Josie to Lagos. And I cover African affairs there, and I do deep dives, and I try to explain everything and dissect everything. So we're coming back on soon. Soon, I think even today there'll be an episode out later on today. So if you love Africa and you feel like you don't have enough conversations about Africa, you can go to the Josie to Lagos podcast. It's available on all of the platforms: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. What is this? iHeart Radio, Pandora, uh, all of these other platforms, all kinds of platforms. I put it everywhere. Tune in. You should be able to find it everywhere. So there's an Africa conversation that affects everyone. The African Free Trade Zone is now operational. The African Free Trade Zone is now operational. What does that mean? Where does that come from? So in 2012, there was an acceleration on this push to create an African continental free trade area. And by 2018, the agreements were signed when Paul Kagame was the president, the chairperson of the African Union. So in Kigali, the African Continental Free Trade Agreements were entered into, and then they were ratified by the requisite number of countries in the following year. And then certain things had to happen. And then last year, the trade zone was supposed to launch, but then, because of COVID-19, there were delays. So 1st of January marked was it 1st or 2nd, whichever day it was, marked the launch of the operational phase of the African continental trade area. So having said that, there are some things that I think I want to bring to your attention, because let's say you have a book right now. Can you sell your book for no tariffs in Rwanda? The answer is actually no. No, you can't. There's still a few things that need to happen. So this operation phase is the beginning of a process. So it doesn't necessarily mean that right now, if you make a cap in South Africa, you can sell it in Togo, right? So let me run you through it. So the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, it fundamentally commits countries to, number one, remove tariffs on 90% of their goods. Number two, to progressively liberalize, see, everyone runs out of English, to progressively liberalize trade in services. And number three, to address a host of other non-tariff barriers. So really what has been identified here is that intra-Africa trade is low, and the objective is to increase intra-Africa trade, the inter-regional trade, the trade within Africa. So right now, intra-Africa trade before this agreement came into effect was at about 15%. 15% of the trade happens within Africa. And to compare that with other regions, in Europe, the level of inter-regional trade is 69%. The level of interregional trade in Asia is 59%. The level of interregional trade in America is 31%. So you can see that 15 to 17% is ridiculously low. So the idea is, how do we increase intra-regional trade? We do so by removing tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. But a lot of stuff still needs to happen before the project can begin to move. And they're hoping that those things can be done within the next 3 months. So the first milestone is the submission of market access offers. The submission of market access offers. Market access offers outline the tariff liberalization schedules of individual countries. So a country like Zimbabwe will go to the Secretariat of the Free Trade Area and say, as Zimbabwe, we're removing tariffs on maize, on sorghum, on mazoe, or drinks, or whatever the case may be, zinc, etc. So that now means that those products can enter the country if they were made in Africa with no extra tariff, no extra cost, right? So the costs are just the cost of delivery, etc. So those offers need to be lodged with the Secretariat. And so far, only 30 countries have submitted their tariff offers or their market access offers, right? So there's still some negotiation and there's still some holdouts. As you can see, 30 out of 54 is it's high, but it's not everyone. So not everyone is fully participating in the continental free trade zone as it exists now. You've got 24 countries that are not yet participating. And you also have some countries which have not ratified the treaty in their countries. So you can sign an international level document as a head of state or as the executive. You can go to the AU and sign a document. That's a treaty that you've signed. But in order for that treaty to become the law of your land, you need to ratify it through your legislative structures. So only 33 countries have done that so far. So that obviously shows you the first hurdle that needs to be overcome is that process of market access offers. The other things that the instruments need to come fully into operation. What are these instruments? What are these trade area instruments? There's 7 of them. Number one, the online platform for tariff negotiations. So tariffs still need to be negotiated, right? Remember, the aim is to remove 90% of the tariffs. But right now, that the idea is you're going to progressively get there, or you're going to have it happen in a liberalization process. So it's not going to be automatically tomorrow all tariffs are removed in Nigeria. Nigeria may decide that they want to keep tariffs on rice because they want to increase localized production of rice, but they may open it up for spaghetti. So the negotiations still need to go on at that level. So online platform for tariff negotiations is one. Number two, I'm counting wrong. So one, and then number two, the African Trade Observatory. Number three, the digital payment and settlement systems. So you got to think about the digital payment system. It's an important element because if I write a book here in South Africa, let's call it the Hacking the Free Trade Guide. So I write my Hacking the Free Trade Guide, and I want to sell it in Ghana, right? After I've delivered my books in Ghana, how am I going to get my money? How am I going to get my payment? So the digital payment and settlement system needs to be put in place. Number four, the online mechanism for reporting and monitoring on non-tariff barriers. So non-tariff barriers are the barriers outside of the tax that make it hard for you to trade. So it could be difficult officials at one particular port. It could be, xenophobia, Afrophobia. It could be a variety of things. So there needs to be a mechanism that is online for reporting and monitoring these barriers so that they can be progressively removed. There needs to be a mobile application, number five, for the African continental business activities. So business people need to have an online platform where they can conduct some of their activities, networking and transactions, right? Then there needs to be what is being called the Mansa repository platform, which is the centralized database for customer due diligence. Because if you're going to be buying stuff all across Africa, as a customer, you need to know that you can read the reviews, you can complain somewhere, you can send stuff back, right? If you need to send stuff back. So that is not fully in effect. And there's also this 1 billion US dollar adjustment facility to offset any losses that are incurred by a particular country or market because of the opening. So if 10 jobs are lost, maybe at SPA, because of the opening of the free trade area, SPA should be able to go to this adjustment facility and say, we lost 10 jobs that we had to retrench. We need that money to pay these workers. So they've tried to think about everything and every step, but those processes are not yet implemented. What we've heard is that the target is for everything to be operational by the 31st of March 2021. So if you're watching and you're really interested in regional trade, I am as well. I really think that we need as youth to jump on every opportunity and to make every opportunity work. I don't think that all people are going to get this right, but I think that as we enter those spaces, we can be the ones to get it right. Old people were never going to create social media. They were just out of touch and they didn't have the creativity. So there's spaces where young people can enter and create a whole world of change and make a whole lot of money. So I'm hoping that we can all make money from this African continental free trade area. So I'll be paying attention to it personally and researching and trying to give you any information I find. If you love listening to podcasts, you should listen to the Josie to Lagos podcast. We'll cover it in full detail in the coming weeks. So, having said that, all of these things need to happen. Number one, we need to watch out for the market access offers. Number two, we need to watch out for the operational instruments to become fully implemented. So, if you're watching this, if by the 31st of March 2021 we don't see the kind of outcomes that we're looking for, then we'll know that these guys are not serious, they're not effective, and we may have to put pressure on them. So that's really where the African Continental Free Trade Area stands right now. It's important for it to work for the youth, it's important for it to work, for women. It's important for it to work for small businesses. If it doesn't do that, it's a waste of time that will only benefit the regional multinationals like MTN and ShopRite, etc., but not necessarily the average civilian. It's also something that could potentially benefit external multinationals as they bring their production processes into Africa, but not necessarily the profits from those production processes. So there's still a lot of conversation that needs to happen, but I think you need to bear in mind that the African Continental Free Trade Area is moving. I want to outline that this is a free trade area that seeks to have free movement of goods, services, and people. And some political parties, they clearly haven't read the treaty and they're just focusing on the trade elements, but they don't realize that the overall objective is to try to replicate the EU model to a large extent, and that's going to include services and people. So a lot of the negotiation still has to happen, hasn't happened yet, and there are some big gaps in the conversation, like environmental protections, etc., etc. But it's not just about goods; it's also about the movement of people. So those people who are not as passionate about the movement of people, they may be in for a shock because the legislation also speaks about, or rather, the treaty also speaks about the movement of people. So it's an exciting time. It's one of the big things that we need to look for. But I want to put a cautionary note, and then I'm gonna leave it there because I think I've gone over time. There's always a new thing that they're selling to Africa. For a while it was micro lending and microfinance, and then studies started coming in 10 years later that it wasn't the panacea that it was advertised to be. So I'm very cautious. I'm cautiously optimistic going into this free trade zone discussion because we can get very distracted sometimes by these new projects, whether it's microloans, whether it's the continental free trade area, where we lose focus on some of the stuff that is happening that we can address. For instance, the decline and decay in democracy in countries like Uganda, countries like Zimbabwe, countries like Cameroon. Those don't necessarily need the same level of weighting as a free trade area, and we can address them as young Africans. So as much as I'm excited about this, I'm still keeping an eye on whether or not it's a distraction, because there's been other continental, not continental, but free trade deals which could make it difficult for Africa to compete regardless. China just entered into a trade agreement with the EU. So, how much more easier will it be for Africa to send imports or exports rather to Europe when China has just got preferential deals now? So, we need to be very cautious that as much as we're being told, oh yeah, this is the thing that's going to make Africa competitive, that's going to industrialize Africa, that's going to employ the youth and support small businesses. I think it does have the potential for that. But we, as young Africans, as people who are going to be living in the future, these old people are going to leave behind. We need to keep close eyes on everything to make sure that we're not being taken for a ride. I can still remember when microfinance, microloans were still, they were being gassed up and hyped by everyone, but they never delivered. They never delivered. And so, in as much as we approach any topic, we need to do so with the right level of focus, scrutiny, and seriousness. So, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Even if one person tunes in, we'll have the conversation. And maybe if you want to be a guest and have like a back and forth, I know Twitter has this video facility now where you can conference call or rather have a chat similar to Instagram. We can definitely do that. Let me know in advance so that we can set it up properly and make sure everything works. Having said that, if there are any comments, if there are any last statements that you want me to respond to, I'm more than happy to do it. Otherwise, we can leave it here. But I'll stay on for a few more minutes to see if you have any comments. Yes, please retweet. Retweet if you can. It helps build audience. We're going to do this weekly at a similar time. Oh yeah, definitely this year I need to get myself a Brentwood. I need to get myself a Puluko installment. That's going to happen. I need to get myself one of these Brentwood shirts. And that shoe, what's that shoe called? Ezra Kavela. Nami ngifuna ukuba ngusleeker. Yeah, so I want to get that. So Juju has asked if it's possible for me to upload the videos on YouTube for latecomers. I do that. Juju, I do that. Maybe in an hour or two, a YouTube video will be up um, on all of these topics. So I do that. And if you were not aware, I do have a YouTube channel. It's called Mighty Jamie TV. So Mighti, Jamie like Jamie Oliver TV. So you should be able to find that. For me personally, YouTube is the side experiment because I appreciate Twitter. This is where we found each other. This is where we have quality conversations. So I want to prioritize the Twitter family first and foremost. I actually like Twitter. I appreciate Twitter. I think we can do great things on Twitter, and great things have been done on Twitter. So I respect the platform. It's still more free than Facebook and Instagram. In fact, Instagram has gone a different direction. Story for another day. And I was on Clubhouse earlier today for the first time, and it's messy. It's really messy. So I think that Clubhouse is interesting because of this exclusivity, whatever, but it may not ultimately be a large adoption platform. So if there are any questions, go ahead, shoot. It's your chance, even if it's one person. It doesn't matter to me. You matter to me, and we can have this conversation. So, Auntie, I normally try to start at 4:30. I don't know where you are watching from. So let's say 4:30 South African time. But today I started at 5. So what I normally try to do is to announce. But what I'll do is I'll announce a little bit more in advance. But 4:30 on a Sunday, we're going to make that our target time. And then maybe if the numbers are not that great for Sunday, we'll shift it to Saturday. But it's a weekend show. as we reflect on the weekend, and maybe we can have suggestions on times. If you have some suggestions, is the evening better than the afternoon, perhaps? So you can let me know. And if you're watching this after, you can just reply in the tweet as a normal tweet. I'll still be able to read those comments. You can still retweet. People can watch even after the fact. And if you watched all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. I really do. Alright, guys, let's end it here.